Now I'm going to demonstrate easy Elizabethan braid stitch, and I must say I thank Alison Cole for introducing me to this and for Meredith Willett to continue to practice this with me on the next retreat. We were very thrilled that Alison and Meredith, who hadn't met before, came on a retreat with us, and it was all very exciting anyway. So this, we saw the Shakespearean pieces in the Shakespeare's Birthplace Trust. So this design, if you buy it, actually gives a percentage back to the Shakespeare's Birthplace Trust, and I think this is getting more and more important. Even our small amounts that we donate to them each year, all these different museums and castles, they've had a pretty tough year in 2020 with no visitors. So hopefully this will support them somewhat. So we begin with a lazy daisy at the top and a reverse chain coming down here. So my first stitch doesn't come up through the top of the line I've drawn on with pencil. It comes down about 1/2 centimetre. So I'm coming up and then going down with my first stitch. Now with the metal thread, I've just left a knot in the back of my work here, because that's what they did in the 17th century. There are knots everywhere with metal thread because they didn't waste a piece. So they wouldn't leave a waist knot at the side and come in, or even have a waist knot down here and 3 little dots. The actual thread is only 12 inches long because it's really difficult to work with. Even the easiest metal thread for me is quite difficult to work with. So I've come up through the line. Now, when I go down, instead of going down in the same hole, I've noticed that in the past, they went down just slightly overlapping. So in fact, this stitch comes up here. The next stitch sort of overlaps it like that. So just crosses over the front of it. Just slightly, just literally a little bump away, one of the twill weaves away. So I take it up and then down, and then up through the top of the line, and then I use my needle just to form that stitch. So just take it gently through until you've formed this lovely teardrop shape, and then couch that down. Now the next stitch comes up the same distance as the height of this stitch, down the line, up through the linen, then take your needle and reverse the needle so that the eye goes through first. So take your needle, push it underneath, and then take it through. And then go down, as I said before. So if I'm coming up on one side of this little ridge, I'm going to go down on the opposite side of it. And we just take it and make that circle. Come up again. And as you come up, just tension those stitches that you've already made. And then you can either go through with the needle first, with the point first, or with the eye, whichever is easiest for you. And then take the needle and thread down again. And as you come up for the 4th stitch, tension the 3rd stitch. Now it's best not to overhandle these threads because they do tarnish quite easily. And so I'm just going to use my needle to just form that shape. So that's the use of the spare needle. Then I'm going to come up underneath that lazy daisy again, and I'm using my fingers to just push those stitches up so they're proud, and that makes it just a little bit easier. As you go down, you can just use that needle to form that shape. So this is what I've done on the row here. And just make sure that your thread doesn't twist too much, because then it'll wear badly as it passes through the linen. It's important to have a fairly big needle because the needle makes the hole in the linen, as you can see, and then the thread passes through, and then when you take it off the hoop, that little hole will close naturally. Just going up on one side of that pencil line and down on the other. These stitches don't actually have to be perfect because you're going to work through them, and that will disguise quite a lot, but try and make them reasonably the same size. And when I get to the end of my thread, I'm going to take my frame, loosen it at the side, and then flip it. So on the back of my work, you'll see there's the knot that started that reverse chain stitch, and then I worked all the way down, and now I've actually threaded, you can see the end of the thread. I threaded it through the back, and you just snip that off to neaten. And any threads lying around like that just need to be fairly short so that they're not going to catch on your work later. I might just melt that down, make something very valuable out of it. So just neatening off those ends without compromising the security of the thread. So on the design, you're told to start at a place that doesn't really matter so much, which are the branches and the stems of these strawberries. And all I've done is to take a stitch into a loop, make a lazy daisy stitch, which is that first row, figures 1 to 4. And then I've continued with reverse chain stitch along through these figs. So you can see this is all very step by step. We've now reached the stage of figure 9 where I've introduced a second thread. So that's what I'm going to do next. So now I've just checked the frame so that it's quite nice and secure, and the wing nut underneath is just tightened with Twizzler, and I've checked the height, and I've just done a little bit of loosening up, and now I'm ready for the next part of this stitch, which is a new thread with a knot on the end, and I'm going to come up through the top. So where the couching stitch is on the first lazy daisy at the very top of the line, I'm just coming up as though I'm coming up underneath it. So that comes up through the line, and then we're on to figure 9 here, and you can see all I'm going to do is thread the needle through the next lazy daisy or the next chain. So this is the top one, this is the second one, so I'm just going to go through there like that, bring your thread through, and then pass it through the upper one, but come over the thread that you've just been passing. So it's through the second chain, up through the first chain, but when you come out, take your needle over the top of the working thread. So take it through, and then just use a laying tool or your needle and just make sure that those threads don't get tangled and they sit beautifully on your piece. So you can see on this line, I've actually taken it a little bit tighter, but you know, metal thread's great because you can just go in and sort it out with a needle or a laying tool. So there you go, that's my first loop, and then I'm going to come down to the number 3 loop, and then again just pass that needle through and over the top of the working thread. Now you can see this is already getting a little bit tangled, so just very gently take those curls out, and I'll just have to work a little bit on my metal thread technique because I don't want it to be tangled. So you can see there that it's getting a little bit twisted. So that happens because it's being passed through the linen, and that's pulling the twist out of shape. So I'm just taking it like that, or you can drop it off your frame like that and just let it hang down. Make sure the return on this is quite short because you don't want to bend your thread down here and have 2 threads going through. This bit will actually not be showing on the piece. That'll be a waste piece anyway at the end. So I'm not wasting any thread. Right, so then go through number 1, 2, 3, 4, smoothly through, and just hold that curved, that loop in place. So you can see that's a much easier thing to do when your thread's behaving well. Now I'm just going to use a second needle to hold that down and bring that up through. So just work out what's most comfortable for you, but definitely use a hands-free frame of some sort. And just take it steadily. I always think that Crewel works for people in a hurry, but Elizabethan stitching is for people with a bit more time, and it's far more deliberate So I'm just going to push that thread down, come up through. And of course this piece would have been made most probably by a professional studio. So we are trying to make some sort of replica, but it doesn't have to be a 7-year training before you actually attempt it, because this is the easier version of an Elizabethan braid stitch. Once I've worked down this side, I'm going to make the exact same technique down the second side, down this side as well. So I'll just carry on working down here, and you can go make a cup of coffee if you want and come back later. So I've now worked down the right side of this piece here, and I'm going to come up underneath the first couching stitch on the very first lazy daisy, and you've just got to sort of squiggle around and make sure that you don't bring your needle up through some knotted piece of metal thread. So that's on the back of it. Just try and avoid that and just make that come through. And then you'll see that my return is quite small again because I don't want to spoil this piece of thread. So all you do is you mirror what you've just done before. So this is on, we've come down here with the first colour, and this is the second colour now. So you come out of the top and just thread through over the top of the of this thread here. So I'm going to come through, go through the second chain, and then when you come through again, you're just going to come underneath the original lazy daisy, that little chain, and just over the top of the loop that you've just created. And just remember that you can use your second needle or a pair of scissors or a laying tool and just get these threads to behave themselves, because you don't want badly behaved metal thread, believe me. So I've come up here through the second one, back through the first one, over the top of that loop. Now the next bit, you come down through the number 3 chain. So you're going to go over the previously worked piece here. So over that first line of loops, and then just gently tease that out or untwist it as you need to. You'll find that the further you go on, the more it twists, because of going through the linen. It just flattens out the ply in the twist of the thread. Right, so I've come through number 3 and I go back to number 2, and I just go over the top of the previous work but underneath the chain and underneath my working thread. Now I'm going to have to do something about this thread because it's not running very smoothly. And if it's difficult, just stop and think about it. And just think, why is that not working? Have I got the correct needle? Is it big enough for the thread? Possibly I've threaded the wrong needle. Actually, I have. So, you know, it's not your fault that something doesn't work. It's something that you haven't done, perhaps. So when you're threading the needle with a metal thread, of course, you don't fold it over and then push that through the needle. This is stiff enough to just thread on its own. Just find the correct side of the needle, so it's the bigger side, which is that one, and then squeeze the thread and just pop that through straight away. And that's really a very easy thread. And then take it through about 1 inch, fold it over and squeeze down hard so you get a real corner in the metal there. So that's catching on the core. You don't want to keep wearing this end of the thread. So I have stitched 1, 2 loops, and now I'm just going to make sure that my thread's lovely and relaxed and that I'm lovely and relaxed, and I'm going to come through this chain here. So it's not this one, it's this one. So you can actually lift it if you like with your other needle, and then just hold the loop that you previously worked down so that your needle passes, as you can see, over the top of there. And that's very well illustrated in our instructions by the wonderful Georgie, who spends a lot of time with a paintbrush in her hand at the moment. She's doing very well illustrating all the stitches. So you've made the loop. Just get it roughly what you want it to look like, and then come through, so over the top of the loop on that side, and then under the chain and over the top of the loop you've just created. and then again, just miss one and come up through the chain, pass it across, and then tension it. And you can see this is an area here I've just worked, and you can go back in and just reorganize these loops if they're not to your liking. But the last thing we're going to do is to actually stitch a line of the lime green wool down each side, so it rather looks as though it's sitting onto felt, which is a rather beautiful look, I think. And that was the look of the original piece. So it really shows off the gold with the beautiful lime green behind it. I particularly like this stitch because I'm very bad at Elizabethan stitches, and I find going backwards to go forwards and then working with metal thread as well, which is not my natural medium to work with. I find that quite difficult. So this easy Elizabethan chain stitch is an absolute breakthrough for me, and I'm very grateful to Alison and to Meredith for being very patient and saying to me, oh, this is really easy, and being bewildered as to why I would find this, as a very experienced stitcher, I would find any sort of metal thread work more challenging. But you know, you just have to get used to it, don't you? So there's two very different looks. That's a much looser and bigger loop, and that's a much tighter one. But when you finish, it looks amazing on this design, and I wish you all the well with it.